This podcast is brought to you by Iris TV. Streaming is now bigger than broadcast and cable, but we all watch our favorite shows and movies on hundreds of different devices and apps. Iris TV makes it easy for advertisers to target viewers with precision at scale across all these platforms. They do this by enabling AI to analyze millions of videos from the leading publishers to create the largest contextual data marketplace for streaming. By building their campaigns with Iris-enabled data, brands like Carl's Jr. are driving higher lifts in awareness and sales while publishers are generating higher yield. Learn more about Iris TV and explore their private marketplace deals by visiting iris.tv/PMP. That's iris.tv/PMP. Welcome to the Marketecture Podcast. I'm Ari Paparo. I am joined today by a great guest, Michael Leavitt from Adara. He's the SVP of Product and Strategy. Adara is a very interesting company in the travel space. We want to hear all about how travel is developing in the programmatic world. And we're doing things a little bit differently this time. So after we come back from the break, Eric Franchi will join us, who will be doing News of the Week with Joe Zappa. Joe is a well-known thought leader and content creator in the ad tech space. I won't be doing News of the Week because I'm on vacation. Some housekeeping. So this week's vendor interview is with Fat Tail. It's an OMS system. There's some interesting things to say about how it's building a marketplace for ads. And then if you're not familiar with terms like Bernanke, Bell, and Poirot, you should read this week's Monopoly report, because I'm doing a deep dive on all the ways that Google has allegedly manipulated auction mechanics. It's a good thing to freshen up on your terms before we jump right into this dramatic trial. All right. With all that said, Michael Leavitt from Adara, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Ari. Glad to be here today.
So what is Adara, briefly?
So Adara is a travel-focused advertising company that has really diversified into measurement and analytics, as well as helping manage first-party data. We've been in the space for over 10 years, really partnered with the travel sector to bring in and create a travel data asset that can really be deployed in a lot of ways.
Yeah, we talk a lot about retail media and commerce media on the show. It's one of our recurring subjects. But people tend to forget about travel. Travel is just an enormous sector that has been doing retail media for 20 years. Travel sites have all kinds of offers and mixes on them, and it's incredibly programmatically driven. So what is the cutting edge in travel? What's going on right now at a high level?
At a high level, it's a great time to be in travel. Post-COVID, you're just seeing this huge spike in demand, and you're seeing a lot of reinvesting in display, video, and social, as you'd expect. But you're also seeing everyone really taking advantage of the new media landscape of CTV, digital out of home, and other growing platforms. And that's not just buying and enabling audiences, obviously. That's also a focus on measurement. That requires a lot of work with all the integrating across all the channels and platforms, as cookies are not going to be the way that all those platforms work. So much like the rest of the category, you see travel leveraging those spaces, but it's a unique space in e-commerce. There's significant levels of logged in interactions. You know, travel brands have been managing deep loyalty programs. They're kind of like the first CDP before there was CDPs, managing their data. And we've really spent the last decade building relationship with those partners.
Right. And context is really important, too. There's so much content on the web about travel, and it is directly relevant to the ads.
Oh, incredibly. I mean, I think there's lots of opportunities coming up in the marketplace right now in terms of how you can set up with inventory that's out there. We certainly see opportunities to take our data asset, you know, whether it's a PMP or another direct relationship, and create an opportunity to do unique, really special things for the travel sector and with the travel data for other sectors, all being that's permissioned and taken care of from all the normal privacy and, quite frankly, the ways that we have to work with our partners to make sure their data is being used the way that they want it to be.
Yeah, you mentioned other partners. So is non-endemic advertising a big part of travel?
Well, I mean, I think forever there's been strong linkages between the travel sector and the credit card and financial sector, luxury purchases. As you know, when people are traveling, a different section of their wallet opens up people splurge. Travel has a lot of non-endemic applications for advertising, marketing, and co-programs.
Absolutely. And so in the retail media, commerce media space, one of the defining characteristics is sort of a hub and spoke model where the retailer is often much larger than the marketers. There may be hundreds or thousands of marketers doing business with a single retailer. And it feels like travel has a similar dynamic with, say, individual hotels or hotel chains, things like that. Am I right in that analysis?
Well, I mean, there's a big trend towards retail media in general. The travel sector has always participated, and it was in many ways one of the first travel retail media sectors, right? So there's a lot of dynamics between the actual selling and context, and that's a very rich moment when people are looking at travel that can be latched onto from other advertisers who are trying to connect with those audiences. When you think about the things that are happening and how big travel retail media could be and just how much the retail media space has taken off, there's a lot more to consider than just the can it be done and can it be delivered. I think we've been active in this space for some time, and there's things like brand standards and all the guidelines that have to be fulfilled. That's a little different, I think, with travel than some of the other retail media, presences that you'll see. They're much different in terms of how much you have to align to that moment, or you have to switch to inventory that isn't as demanding in those guidelines.
Well, can you give us an example to flesh that out a little bit?
Well, I think when you look at, I won't talk about any specific brand, but, when you talk about just placing an ad in the context of some of these other environments, you're talking about 2 pages of guidelines. When you're talking about a travel brand, there could be anywhere from 20 pages up in terms of the representation of how that has to be presented to meet the guidelines.
And this goes beyond, say, like brand safety. This is a different level of suitability.
Suitability, alignment, everything down to the, color spectrums, you name it.
How do you do that in programmatic or in an automated fashion?
Well, I think it's quite hard in programmatic, and there's going to have to be technology advances. I think AI is a great opportunity for that to be advanced. I think there's things that could happen in terms of literally feeding in 2 sides of the brand standards and creative and using generative AI to do those things. But that's a ways off. Right now, I think you still see a lot of people managing the actual placements that are going into these as more like a PMP would or a direct buy. You don't see it as much in the sense of the way you do in retail media yet. I think it's changing. And I think that also as people are moving to try and work with the broader ad placing sectors, those things will loosen up also.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up AI because another difference, I think, between retail media and travel media is that travel media has a lot more to work with on the creative side. Even a single hotel could have hundreds of photos and lots of text. And how are the brands using all that stuff? Are they thinking about AI? Are they just doing machine learning testing about what works? Or is it still human beings figuring out what's the most attractive photo of the pool?
No, I think people are definitely leveraging all the tool sets available to generate the best quality creative. I certainly think you need specialization, and some of our companies that are in our broader RateGain portfolio focus on the various specialties of social media and paid meta, all those types of areas, because they are specialized and they do require different treatments for how you actually work with the brands and give them the best lighting in terms of the context of how they're being placed.
Right. Is that an important part of Adara's business, working in creative side?
We're more focused on the targeting and media buying, but we work with the other partners in creative, and especially from the sense of developing an integrated marketing program. We see a lot of time spent on how to best assemble the media with either the agency or the brand across CTV, digital out of home, as well as the traditional display and video outlets. Also, just in terms of measurement, we provide specialized measurement that really helps evaluate how, not necessarily creative, but how the strategy is doing. And it's not just along the lines of, is this a standard metric that is doing well? Your standard ROIs, your standard view throughs, all those types of things. We're able to provide travel insights alongside of that really flesh out what's happening. And particularly as you talk about sectors like the destination marketing organizations, trying to get people to increase tourism and visit places, you start to see us playing a role in really defining, well, did that CTV really drive people into the market? Are you seeing a change in the way that length of stay is happening? What type of profile is that bringing to the market?
That's really interesting. I was going to ask something similar, but what are the sort of key metrics that are used in the travel space? Is it just ROI, or is it ROAS, or are people going more sophisticated about long-term loyalty?
Well, when you're actually talking about a travel brand, there's a lot of metrics dedicated to the travel space. And certainly it's not just, the spend and the loyalty metrics, but are you acquiring new loyalty members? What's the value of that person in terms of repeats? So there's specific things within the travel brands, but also more broadly looking at how people are interacting with the brand, and when they are, interested and paying attention to your advertising, are they still on their journey and have completed that? Or are they completing it with you? So when somebody doesn't actually interact with your, complete their actions with you, are they still in the market? Did they exit the market? Those are becoming critical metrics in travel specifically, because there's lots of steps in setting up that travel journey.
How much data sharing is there? And is it companies that are sort of ad networks that are doing the deduplication?
We're the perfect example of where a network of partners are providing their data with a set of data rights management that says how they want that data to be used. And then we're able to apply that to really put together the journey for different views for the different types of end users that were there. So for an end user like the destinations, they get a very complete view, because an airline, a hotel, all of those people are really constituents of the destination. And there isn't a competitive problem. And we're reporting those things in aggregate. It's not at the individual level. So the destinations are getting a very complete picture. When you talk about sharing between the actual travel brands, it tends to be that the airlines don't want to share with other airlines. The hotels don't want to share with other hotels. And again, it's not direct sharing. It's aggregate insights and really allowing things like profiling.
Well, would I know if I was an airline, how often someone, say, was in market for a vacation and chose a different airline? Do you give them like the negative on when they were not chosen?
So we don't really tell them that another airline was chosen. We're able to really tell them that this trip was completed in various ways. And we're able to tell them, sort of the level of activity and searching and booking that's going on around that.
So I might know I spent X dollars on people who are interested in a vacation to, say, the Dominican Republic, and this is how many people there were, and this is how many people booked with me, and you do the difference, and that's the number of people who ended up, not booking with me.
Yeah, and I think it's much more about, in our world, are you still able to interact with these people? Are they still really on this journey? And then understanding on the other end, when you're on the loyalty side of your data, who are you seeing that is not active in your network, but is active out there in the world of travel?
And when it comes down to user data, individually identifiable users, there's some sharing, like you mentioned, the credit card companies. Are there privacy-enhancing technologies in play, like clean rooms or other methods that are starting to be used?
When you talk about actual sharing to the end users, there isn't a lot of that going on directly. As I said, it's a lot of reporting and it's a lot of activation on our network in media and placements. But when you're talking about what's starting to happen in terms of when partners want to share those data, there's a ton of clean room activations going on, we will help and enrichment of data and allow those types of clean room transfers to happen. I think what's really interesting in the marketplace that's coming up is the ability to do synthetic data sets and really get away from having to, manage any type of direct enrichment where we really have to abstract the data very, very far away in something like a signal or score, and much more. You can start potentially really creating sets of data that people can analyze that's safe and still has a lot of the richness of the original data. It's just abstracted and being able to be used completely on its own. I think that has a lot of really interesting applications that are coming up for work with publishers. I think that that's a place that you'll see our data being able to be applied in more contextual targeting in the future. And it's going to be, I think, a watershed in the industry as those techniques get married with clean rooms, get married with data science teams that really know how to leverage them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. You mentioned earlier, though, that one of the aspects of travel is that it has a high degree of user logins. Is the travel industry buying into UID2 and hashed emails and things like that as a lingua franca post-cookie?
Certainly, we are, participate in those alternate ideas. And I think one of the things that we've done to deal with all the potential cookie deprecation that is out there, there's already been cookie effectiveness deprecation throughout time, is we've moved to those first party IDs. And because we're in travel, we're very lucky that we can, really build out those alternate IDs very successfully. The logged in population on travel is much, much, much more substantial than your average publisher or website. And the other thing is that people are giving good quality identification in most of these cases. So we're protecting that data from day one. When we receive it from partners and it's permissioned and consented, we're never getting any sense of the original value. It's already been hashed and encrypted, and that's how we're handling those things. But you can simultaneously build out these other frameworks, and certainly UID2 has made that very easy for us.
You mentioned CTV a number of times. What's your general take on operating travel advertising in CTV?
Well, I think that there's a lot of ability to integrate that media with other media like digital out of home. Especially in the travel sector, you're seeing a lot of what I would call integrated plans where, there's something going on in the market that they're trying to drive and they're putting a covering layer in CTV. Again, because we're able to do the types of measurement we can tie those things together. But I do think that, one of the biggest things in CTV is that, the CPMs are becoming much more approachable. It used to be an incredibly expensive venture and very hard to put data into action on. And now we're starting to see that all change and a lot of the mobility of targeting starting to be able to be achieved with CTV.
Right. So there's obviously contextually relevant, travel-oriented content, but then you're using user data as an important, overlay on top of CTV. Is that a good way of saying it?
Yeah. The entire industry is starting to be able to activate data in these sectors in a different way than they had. Clean rooms are a big part of that. And as the industry has really started to learn how to, better enable the ID graphs in those spaces, you're seeing better match rates and deliveries within those platforms.
Any predictions for travel advertising over the next several years? I think it's fair to say that post-COVID, we're at a high in terms of tourism and travel around the world. Things look pretty rosy, but how's the outlook from your perspective?
I think you're going to see a lot more services really bring together. I think one of the reasons that RateGain really looked at the opportunity with Adara is they're managing a set of rate parity, distribution, pricing problems. And those things are also going to be applicable in the marketing spaces, customizations based on price, customizations based on things that are happening in the market. that really matter to these brands and drive up the effectiveness of that advertising.
Yeah, we didn't mention that Adara is owned by a company called RateGain, a SaaS company in travel. I'll ask you one last question, a really provocative one. Do you see a world where AI plans trips for people and they don't search the web for travel information?
I think it's quite possible, but I think you still need all the feedback and the interaction with people. And I think there's a bunch of companies that are really talking about how to influence AI these days. So whether it's reputation or information, you're starting to see a new burgeoning industry that's happening that essentially, if AI is planning it, there's going to be all these players that really drive into how AI is planning that. And I think we're very far away from that. People are so emotionally involved with travel. It's a very personalized experience. And it's one of those things that people want to plan, not necessarily, put out of their mind. I think what they want, they'll do is they'll start to, like many things, have prompts and try to put together larger planning and itineraries and those types of things first.
Yeah, I'm on the verge of going on a family vacation, and I planned a lot of the trip with AI, and it was so helpful. But I ultimately went to the web to do the purchases myself. All right, well, let's call it there. So, Michael Leavitt from Adara, thank you so much for your insights about the travel industry.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hope to do it again.
All right, we'll go for a quick break, and then Joe Zappa and Eric Franchi will be back with the news of the week, and I'll return next week. This podcast is brought to you by LiveIntent. Whether or not Google ever decides to remove cookies, LiveIntent's Hero, that's helping identity reveal opportunity, offers a solution that transforms non-addressable audiences into addressable inventory using first-party data. Hero is scalable, interoperable, and integrated with major industry players, providing a robust framework for navigating this new era. See how Hero can help you quickly unlock your inventory at liveintent.com/hero. That's liveintent.com/HIRO.
And we're back. As Ari probably mentioned, he is on the road this week, so we're splitting the duties. I'm Eric Franchi. I'm here with my friend and co-host of the Open Market Pod, Joe Zappa. We're going to do the news of the week. Hey, Joe, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Eric. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to replace the leading ad tech luminary.
This is true. We have a bunch of stuff to go through this week. We'll hit it. So we record these typically on Thursdays. So last week on Thursday morning, the news of the day was that X was suing GARM, the WFA, and a couple of brand advertisers. And shortly thereafter, GARM announced that they were discontinuing operations because of the lawsuit. Bit of a turn of events. I don't know if anybody predicted that one, but Joe, what's your take on this?
Well, I think GARM is really flawed. Their categories are very broad. I think they had 11 issues that they would analyze content for to help brands, protect themselves reputationally. But for example, they had categories like debated sensitive social issues. And the problem with that is that publications would get a rating like low risk, medium risk, or high risk. And the way I think a lot of brands and agencies would use GARM is they would just say, like, we're not sponsoring anything that's medium risk for, adult content or drugs or debated sensitive social issues. But the outcome of that, when a framework like GARM is applied too broadly, is that you end up just excluding a lot of content that like any reasonable human would say is sponsorable, but that violates like one of GARM's, 10-ish categories for some level of risk. So I think it's not that GARM was like fatally flawed in the way it was structured, but it was just too easy to use it poorly. And so even though I don't personally believe they were specifically discriminating against conservative voices, I do think they led to the exclusion of a lot of high quality content. So I'm personally not devastated to see it go. And I hope that something a little more precise that will be a little less penalizing to publishers will replace it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a good take. I think with the specific to X, the allegation was that GARM and its participants were basically conspiring to not advertise on X, and there was an antitrust allegation. So that's the That's the thing that, I think is in question here. And this made me continue to just think about X in general. So there was a report that dropped earlier this year, basically saying that, that it was dated, but between the time of the acquisition in 2022 and then the first half of 2023, there's a year over year revenue was down 40% after Elon bought the site. We don't know what the state of things are now, but presumably, revenue continues to be down. Why do you think revenue is down so much?
Well, my impression is that he gutted a lot of the organization, then also told its major customers, i.e. brand advertisers, to go F themselves. So I would personally not recommend that as a course of action. I am not telling any ad tech companies to go F themselves as someone who likes doing business with them. But I don't know, you know far more about operating a decently large organization than I. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think, both Mark Manito and Ari made good points last week when we were talking about this. Number one was, to your point, they had a large ad sales team. And just that team was well regarded. They had strong coverage. When you have feet on the street, like there's a direct correlation between, just like activity and revenue. So when you effectively gut that, I think there's a direct correlation in the other way, right? So it's like, number one, there's just like coverage that's no longer happening. Clearly, to your point, there's, the lightning rod that is, brand advertisers being concerned about placements and, what Elon said in terms of the GFY. And then Ari had a good point in that some of the brand dollars were actually not even coming from ad sales at all. It was coming from distribution deals with some of the like live broadcasters, which again, I don't know the state of. So, I think just like dismantling some of these teams that were on the street, doing these syndication deals, doing these distribution deals largely had an effect there. And what presumably the job at hand is building an ad product that is, sustainable for the future, i.e. something that is likely self-serve, something that likely targets the mid to long tail of advertisers that, are probably more geared towards the direction that X is going. And, to date, I think I've seen, frankly, some improvements. Like there's more advertisers. There's certainly like bidding on contextual keywords. I think there's probably a lot of supply that the DR advertisers are, kind of taking advantage of this ARB opportunity. But, it really seems to be that the future of X needs to be, like, Meta and Google in terms of a distribution curve of a lot of small advertisers. And the question is, can they make it? I don't know.
Yeah, it's always seemed that Twitter and Reddit are really underperforming in terms of monetizing their contextual advertising opportunities because they're both platforms where people really converge around interests and topics, right? Like we talk about ad tech Twitter or ad tech Reddit. It seems like there's a lot of money there that those companies should be able to make that they haven't historically been able to capitalize on. The other thing I would just throw back to you, last point on this or question for you is, maybe it's just idiosyncratic to Elon Musk, but it seems like the story of Twitter over the last few years would cohere with what happens sometimes when Silicon Valley people acquire media properties because they don't always understand like what a people-driven business it is. And like you can't take a purely like tech-driven approach. Like those legions of, ad salespeople, you actually do need them. And it reminded me a little bit of conversations you and Ari have had on the pod about, the history of Google and DoubleClick and all of that. And just Silicon Valley people sometimes not understanding the orientation of New York ad salespeople.
Yeah, I think that you raise a good point there. Meta and Google aside, which have just been incredible in, monetizing the long tail of advertisers via, self-serve, and they're well-known consumer brands. They make it easy to drop $50, $100 with a credit card and, see ROAS on it. That aside, everything else is sold, right? So like, small, medium-sized advertisers, SMBs, they buy Meta and Google. Everything else, you are selling that media. So when you remove the teams and the people and the functions that are largely responsible for, moving that media for want of a better term, you're not in market and somebody else is going to be in the customer's offices and whether it's, kind of in person or virtually, competing for those dollars. So I think that's generally right. Until you are a must buy and an easy buy and an automatic buy, you're duking it out.
Yep. Makes sense.
Makes sense, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, we'll move on. Another one we'll just touch on after last week. Again, we won't spend too much time on it, but these are, interesting topics that continue to develop is related to Google. So last week we broke the news about the news being broken of Google effectively kind of being called a monopoly by the U.S. government. This week, the news came out that the U.S. is actually considering breaking up Google for that monopoly characteristic or antitrust. So specifically, the Justice Department is reportedly considering a push for a historic breakup of Google's business empire after a federal judge ruled the big tech giant has an illegal monopoly over online search. And specifically, the DOJ could ask Judge Amit Mehta to order Google to sell portions of its biz with potential candidates for divestment, including Android, so the actual operating systems, number one. Number two, the Chrome web browser, and then AdWords, right? So the key components of how all of this stuff ends up becoming such a monolithic and arguably or allegedly monopolistic business get broken apart, which would be historic.
Ari has his newsletter on this. A lot of people smarter than I and more knowledgeable about the topic have weighed in on it, so I won't say too much here. But one thing I am curious about, Eric, is you have a stake more so than the average listener of the pod in the viability of the ad tech ecosystem as a whole and in the future of, ad tech startups that might be challenging incumbents on various parts of the business. So I wonder if you view a potential breakup of Google as something that would actually oxygenate the ecosystem, because often I think what stops people from starting companies or from investing in them is the fear that they can't compete with Google and its peers, or that those companies might just stomp them out of existence.
Yeah, I think there's a ring of truth to that for sure, right? Anything that removes, Google's stranglehold on ad tech. And again, this is a little bit more about search than ad tech, but I think we need to pay attention to all of this stuff because the ad tech antitrust trial is fast following in September. So anything that I think, kind of loosens the stranglehold that Google has on the ecosystem is a positive. But on the other side, Google has been Google for as long as I've been doing this, right? Literally they started it when I started my career. They built their ads business in the early 2000s. And, they've been a leader and increasingly a powerful leader in that entire time. And there's been a lot of companies that have been successful building around areas that, they're not necessarily leading the market in. So, I think, again, having done this for this long, while I think true, yes, it oxygenates and creates the opportunity on the other side, I think the good companies are continue to be good companies and find opportunities irrespective of what the fate of Google is. The other thing I think about, and again, just having, kind of seen the patterns here is Europe, I believe, forced or attempted to force Microsoft to break up. And this was like 20 years ago. And it never happened because it was too difficult to break up Microsoft because of the effect that it would have on both enterprises and consumers. Again, folks that are deeper in the Microsoft history could probably elaborate a little bit more. And I wonder if, again, Google is so intertwined on both an enterprise and a consumer level, you might see this being a factor that drags this thing on and doesn't make it so easy to happen or doesn't happen at all. Remains to be seen.
Yeah, I'm sure whatever does happen will take years to play out. And another company that has been crushing it for many years now is The Trade Desk.
Yeah. Talk about TTD. You put out a pretty viral tweet on TTD.
Yeah, I would say it went ad tech viral,
ad tech viral, yeah.
Which is to say it got like 80 likes on Twitter, which, is not much for other industries. But hey, we're trying to keep ad tech Twitter alive and help it thrive and prosper. Yeah, so The Trade Desk had another very successful earnings call. And what I found particularly interesting was the perspective that CEO Jeff Green laid out. So it's just striking, even just the way they approach it, right? So it's not like a piecemeal presentation of a bunch of different facts about the business. Like they have a sweeping narrative about the industry that positions them at the forefront of it. And that narrative is that the walled gardens are peddling trash and grading their own homework, so they can't be trusted. The Trade Desk is the portal to the major alternative to the walled gardens, which is the open web. But the open web also has a lot of trash and MFAs and such on it. And so what advertisers essentially need is a steward of the open web who can direct them toward the best parts of it. And that is the way the Trade Desk is positioning themselves, as the portal to what they're now calling not the open internet, but the open premium internet.
Right.
So they're essentially saying, like, don't trust the walled gardens. There's a lot of like shitty user generated content on there, and you can't trust them to accurately portray results because they have a stake in them. Trust us to be the portal to the alternative to that, which is a curated version of the open web. And by the way, we are the best actor to do that because we have made investments in CTV and audio and retail media, where the growth is coming from in the open web, more so than our competitors. And we will be the one-stop shop for that.
Because your tweet just was that, like very compelling narrative against LiveRamps, which, effectively, and you should elaborate on the post itself, because it was really good. How, your view as a marketing strategist is like, this very cohesive, compelling narrative, which again, they've allowed to, I think, play out in their favor over time, has led to just all of this momentum, right?
A message should do two things. It should differentiate you from your competitors and galvanize your customers and other stakeholders. I think with the Trade Desk, it's very clear how they're differentiating both from the other ad tech companies that have a stake in the open web, especially other DSPs, by saying they just simply can't compete with our scale, and from the walled gardens by saying, again, they're grading their own homework and peddling trash, and we're not. In fact, we are curating the best of the open web for you, and we're best positioned to do that. So the Trade Desk comes out looking like they are the future of digital advertising for the agencies and brands that depend on them. Now, with LiveRamp, I think there is an absence of that sort of sweeping narrative that positions them at the center or future of the industry. And the reason that's particularly damaging for them in this moment is that, they are historically representative of a part of the market, call it data brokerage or whatever else, that is obviously threatened by privacy changes. And so you see them, they obviously acquired Habu, the data clean room company, and they are trying to adopt the term that like a competitor like InfoSum uses, which is data collaboration. But it's not really clear exactly what they're doing with that term. And specifically when they spoke about Google's decision not to automatically deprecate cookies, to turn that back to consumers, they didn't have any sort of narrative around it. They were kind of like, our sales cycles are increasing, which is sort of our most negative financial indicator. And Google not automatically deprecating cookies would seem to maybe exacerbate that problem. And our story, to the extent that we have one to head off those challenges, is that, investments in LiveRamp increase ROAS and they increase performance. And so the point I was just making is that, when you say our story is that we're increasing ROAS, that's really more of a metric than a story. And it's certainly, even if it is a story, not the kind of sweeping narrative that the Trade Desk is the expert at propagating to position themselves at the center of things and make investments in them feel inevitable.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, and well said. A couple other points on the quarter for TTD. Their revenue was up, extremely solidly. It was up 26% year over year. They did $585 million in revenue for the quarter. And, there were two things that, Jeff talked about on the call, in addition to the performance and the narrative and everything like that. So number one, he made this statement that UID had reached critical mass or ubiquity. I don't think there was any data that was provided to further validate that. I think it was a little bit more of a qualitative statement. And he said this is especially true in areas that UID or some sort of connector is even more important because there is no cookies, which is audio and CTV. So I thought that was, interesting that you kind of put that out there, especially after Tim Vanderhook, who put out this poll on LinkedIn, basically asking all of the people that work in the ecosystem if they believe that UID has reached critical mass. And I just looked, and 84% of the people that responded to the poll believe that UID has not reached critical mass. So I don't know what that's representative of, and perhaps it's representative of the fact that Jeff is really pointing towards where the future is, right? Audio and CTV rather than core of ad tech. But I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah, Viant. So Tim Vanderhook, of course, the CEO and co-founder of Viant, and they right on their site, you can see they have bid stream data, and you can see what percentage of bids various IDs, including cookies, are showing up in. And I believe their data shows that UID2, the Trade Desk's identifier, is showing up in something like 4% of bids. So this to me is probably the major weakness. If someone wanted to contest the Trade Desk, you would do it on those grounds, is to say that to really be this portal to the premium internet, especially to be a one-stop shop, you need to be able to orchestrate addressable advertising on this open web. And to do that, they've obviously made these significant investments in the email-based identifier, which is UID2, and OpenPass, their single sign-on solution. And it's far from obvious, I think even they would have to concede that that will be a truly universal identifier, which means advertisers are still going to have to rely on sort of a patchwork of different solutions to reach addressable audiences. For
sure. All right, cool. That was great. Let's hit one more, which is a rumor. We've been doing these rumors now, I think, every single week in this age of the comeback of scaled M&A. So Criteo is rumored to be looking at acquiring Skai, SKAI, which was formerly known as Kenshu, got their start in, I think, search and social, and is nearly 20-year-old company. And the rumored acquisition price for it is $500 million. So this is a real number, a real acquisition for Criteo, which continues to evolve. And again, Joe, I'll throw it to you because you, likely in anticipation of this, you sort of pulled a little bit of the Twitterati to get takes on it. So tell us what you learned about Skai and what the thesis behind such a deal might be.
Yeah, I love when the ad tech industry helps me do my homework. I wish I had calculus Twitter when I was in high school trying to make my way through Calc BC.
The funniest thing is, we work together on a couple of things. I see you doing it. I'm like, oh, he's just taking the docket for this week and asking the smartest people out there. And I never do it. And I get so frustrated because you just come in with all these great takes and you just assembled them from a bunch of people that are doing unpaid work for you.
I've always been a good student, and students love to learn in any way they can. Okay, as you said, the Twitterati provided various hypotheses for why Criteo might be looking to acquire Skai. I mean, one is just taking over a competitor. They're both involved in this commerce media space. Simple. If you can, eliminate a competitor and absorb their business, and if there's overlap, then that could be fine in of itself. Another is that Skai seems to have some sort of ability to report on incrementality, or that's how they bill themselves. This was part of the Digiday story on this potential acquisition, that Skai could help Criteo show incremental results as a result of investments in commerce media. It was pointed out by Olivia Corey of, I think she's of House.io, that could be particularly of interest to Criteo, given their historical business in retargeting and their new business in retail media. These are both forms of advertising investments that maybe aren't naturally positioned to crush it at incrementality specifically, because they maybe over-index for the sort of performance advertising that gets you in front of people who would have bought your stuff anyway. So an investment in a company that excels at incrementality might help them sort of position themselves effectively against those doubts. And a third thing is that if you go to Criteo's site, they call themselves the commerce media platform for the open internet. Whereas if you go to Skai's site, they say something very similar, but specifically for walled gardens. And they specifically nod to their ability to consolidate over 100 publishers and retail media networks into a single platform for complete visibility across your paid media program. So there might be a 1 + 1 = 3 type effect here, insofar as Criteo excels at the open web and Skai at the walled gardens, and you put them together and you have, a more complete set of advertising opportunities.
Yeah, to me, that last point that you made is the biggie. Our mutual friend Adam Epstein from Gigi, he pointed this out, that Sky is a top 2 player in site-sponsored ads, which represents 80%, even more, of all retail media. So, effectively, Criteo plus Sky ends up being like really, really big in terms of connecting both supply side and demand side for retail media. And then the other thing is it unlocks Amazon and Walmart, which Criteo doesn't have now. So again, to your point, like, the future of, if you believe the future is retail media and CTV, that means the future is kind of walled gardens, right? So, any player needs to have access to these increasingly like higher walls that, are not necessarily like fully walled off. So, getting access to Amazon and Walmart unlocks so much supply for Criteo that I think it could be like a real unlock and probably worth the premium paying for the business. So from that perspective, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, also Sky used to be called Kenshu, and what it excelled at or focused on was search, right? And as you nodded to, a lot of retail media is sponsored product ads, which are essentially a search proposition on a marketplace. So makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense for sure. So lots of M&A rumors, lots of M&A happening. I think this is going to be a continued theme for the second half of this year, if the summer has been any indication. Well, Joe, this has been awesome. Thanks for coming on doing the news of the week for us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Delighted.
Absolutely. Everyone, Ari and I will be back together, although we're never together. We're always on separate screens for next week. But in the meantime, enjoy the weekend, and we appreciate you tuning in. We'll talk to everybody later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for subscribing to Marketecture. New interviews are added every week at marketecture.tv and your favorite podcasting app.
Thank you for listening to the Marketecture podcast. New episodes come out every Friday, and an insightful vendor interview is published each Monday. You can subscribe to our library of hundreds of executive interviews at marketecture.tv. You can also sign up for free for our weekly newsletter with my original strategic insights on the week's news at news.marketecture.tv. And if you're feeling social, we operate a vibrant Slack community that you can apply to join at adtechgod.com.